Good evening, I'm Rory. I want to welcome you and thank you for joining us tonight. Tonight's webinar, Don't Fear FeLV, Feline Leukemia as the Next Frontier of Feline Lifesaving. Tonight you're in for a treat. Over the next hour and a half, you'll learn the best practices in shelter housing, testing, and treatment, and get front row access to information that has not been shared anywhere else. Our presenters tonight are Frenden and Natascha Hamman. Monica is the Director of Feline Lifesaving at American Pets Alive. She's also an instructor for the American Pets Alive Maddie's Lifesaving Academy and a City of Austin Animal Advisory Commissioner. In 2012, Monica joined Austin Pets Alive, where she served as the cat program manager, led her team to an 88% growth in cat adoptions, and helped Austin achieve a citywide 98% live release rate for cats, helping to make Austin the safest place in America to be a cat. Natascha is the Feline Leukemia Program Manager for Austin Pets Alive and has overseen the intake and placement of over 1,000 FeLV cats since 2017. Together, Natascha and Monica oversee a number of FeL research studies using adoptable cats at the Austin Pets Alive Feline Leukemia Adoption Center. Special thanks to Maddie's Fund, the University of Florida, Wynn Feline Foundation, and IDEX for partnering with Austin Pets Alive on various studies that made this information and other FeLV research possible. Before we get started, quick housekeeping. Questions will be collected through the chat function. Time permitting, after the presentation, our speakers will answer as many questions as they can. If your question is not answered this evening, we'll follow up with you to make sure you get the information that you need. Take it away, Monica and Natascha.
My name is Monica Frenden, and I'm going to be kicking us off tonight as we get into talking about feline leukemia, and then Natascha will jump in as we go. I wanted to quickly thank over 600 people who are logged in tonight to join us, and I think that really goes to show you how many of us in the industry are interested in feline leukemia, and we're trying to save these cats, and we're dying for information. So hopefully we're going to give you guys a lot to think on tonight. And we're going to go through myths of feline leukemia and facts, all about testing, and hopefully we're going to shatter some misconceptions that you may have and help you save more cats along the way. So really quick, we use a little acronym FeLV at Austin Pets Alive, FeLV. So when we talk about FeLVs, those are our FeLV positive cats. So really quickly, we'll get started with very simply, what is feline leukemia? And this may not be a simple question because you probably have heard many things of what feline leukemia is and is not. So what feline leukemia is a retrovirus. It's a retrovirus that weakens a cat's immune system. It is a virus and not a cancer. So unlike humans, where leukemia is cancer, feline leukemia is not, it's a virus. Feline leukemia is contagious to only other cats. So your dog, your guinea pig, nothing else can get feline leukemia. It's spread primarily from mating, that's the #1 transmission, and then from kitten to queen to kitten, lesser so through shared bodily fluids. It's not spread through casual contact, not by fomites, it's not airborne. You can only get it through fluids, essentially. The good news is that this virus itself is a real weenie of a virus. It's very, very fragile. Outside the host, it dies within the environment within minutes, and it's killed by even the weakest of cleaning products. So it is really a fragile, fragile virus. It's not hardy at all like parvo or panleuk. What we know is that feline leukemia infects 2 to 3% of cats worldwide. Of course, predominantly are intact outdoor cats who mate and fight. That's what feline leukemia is. And what happens to these cats here in the United States? It's getting better. But unfortunately for these cats, they're amongst the highest risk cats that enter municipal animal shelters. Almost always these guys are killed upon a positive test result still. Best case, they may land in a sanctuary. So why is it? A lot of our myths and fears really start around testing. We don't understand the results. We have a lot of myths that still linger about how contagious the virus is. There's a portion of folks who think that feline leukemia cats are sick and suffering, and so we should euthanize them to alleviate that. There's a camp of people who think that these cats are not adoptable. Then, of course, the test results where it's just, even if we do test the cats, we don't know what they mean. So really quickly, we're going to throw up a poll, and we're going to see what you are doing when you have a cat at your shelter test positive for feline leukemia. So what is the most common outcome for feline leukemia positive cats in your organization? Is it adoption, rescue or transfer placement, sanctuary placement, euthanasia, or you don't know, or other? We'll give everybody a second to answer here. Okay, here's our poll results. So it looks like excellent news. The majority of our audience, 37%, you are adopting these cats out. So yay, big round of applause for you guys. 20% of us are sending them to sanctuary, 15% rescue or transfer, 19% of us are euthanizing these cats, and then a whole mess of us don't know. So we're kind of all across the board right here. And that's helpful to know as we keep going here, and maybe we'll open up some ideas for you guys on what else we can do for these cats. So here's our prevalence across the United States for both feline leukemia and FIV. And it's pretty similar throughout the United States, but there are some big differences here, or small differences that add up in a big way. So if you see the Northeast, we're kind of lower up in the Northeast than we are down in the South. And if you think about what's been going on in the Northeast for cats for a long, long time, there's been really aggressive spay-neuter in the Northeast for a decade or more ahead of the rest of the country. And we know that through aggressive spay-neuter, particularly aggressive TNR, we can control the significance or the prevalence of these two viruses in the community. So that's just my takeaway, that may be why the Northeast is seeing less feline leukemia, less FIV, than places like the South, where we have not historically had as much aggressive spay and neuter or TNR of cats. But depending on where you are in the country, that is the prevalence of your retroviruses in the felines in your area. So we're talking about retroviruses, and we're going to get a little nerdy on you right now. So I hope you like science things. So what is a retrovirus? If you are a cat nerd like I am, retroviruses are the neatest things in the world. A retrovirus is a virus that's composed of RNA, not DNA like a regular virus. After infecting a cell, a retrovirus integrates its viral DNA into the DNA of the host cell, and that's where it replicates. And I promise this will all make sense very soon if I'm losing you. Retroviruses are super cool. They're often called fossil viruses because they're remnants of ancestral germline infections, very, very, very old. In the case of feline leukemia, the germline actually came from mice after the species separated from leopards. So very, very, very old and neat stuff. There's two types of retroviruses, endogenous and exogenous. Endogenous means normal genomes that are found in virtually all vertebrates, and exogenous are horizontally transmitted agents which can cause disease. So endogenous FeLV represents a footprint of ancient retroviruses transmitted vertically from parent to offspring. These can be detected with PCR testing. So kind of remember this when we talk about PCR testing in a second, that PCR is detecting the footprint of the ancient retrovirus. So let's get started talking about testing. What types of tests are there for feline leukemia? You may be running one of these, you may be running lots of them. Point of care tests are the most common. This is what you're using in-house. There's many different brands. You may be using IDEX SNAP tests or Witness tests, your rapid fire in-house tests that you're likely ordering and running in-house if you've got a shelter program. Then you have IFA testing. You're going to send this out. There's a variety of labs you can send it to. Traditionally, we have thought of IFA as a confirmation test. These are a little bit more expensive. And then you have PCR testing. You send these out, it's very expensive, it's much less common, but some shelters are doing PCR tests now. So we're gonna throw up another poll right now, and we're gonna see how the audience is testing in their care for feline leukemia right now. So how are you currently testing for feline leukemia? And you can select all that apply. So are you using a point of care test? That's your SNAP, Witness, Abaxis, any other rapid fire test that you're using in-house or at your private veterinarian. Are you doing IFA? Are you doing PCR? Or are you doing something else entirely? Go ahead and select all that apply, and we'll give everybody a minute to respond. Okay, results are in. 83% of you are using point of care tests. That makes sense. It's the most affordable and most accessible. 13% of you are sending out for IFA and 2% are sending out for PCR. 2% of our audience is doing something else entirely. So this is right in line with kind of what we said. Usually for most of us in industry, we start with the in-house point of care and then we kind of escalate up the testing scale, if you will. Okay, we'll go ahead and close that poll and we're going to keep on trucking here. So let's start with everybody's favorite, the rapid fire in-house test. We're going to talk a little bit about the ELISA test. The only rapid fire test that is a true ELISA is the IDEX SNAP test. And the ELISA, so enzyme-linked immunosorbent assay, big fancy name. What this test does is measure and detect antigens in the blood. So what the IDEX ELISA is doing is looking for specifically the P27 antigen. This is a core protein of the feline leukemia virus. An antigen is a foreign substance that causes an immune system response, especially the production of antibodies to fight it off. So important to know about the ELISA test and any rapid fire feline leukemia test. It is looking for an antigen, not an antibody. Big difference there. But what this ELISA test is specifically looking for is this P27 antigen. So let's talk a little bit about the ELISA and some things that you need to know and you may not know now. So it's measuring that P27 antigen. And why could the P27 antigen be floating around in a cat? It could just be because of exposure. The ELISA test is not actually measuring whether a cat has feline leukemia or not. It is measuring whether it has the P27 antigen floating around inside the cat's blood. So it could just be picking up exposure. One test does not prove systemic infection. Brand of test matters. We are not paid to say this, I promise you, I wish we were, but IDEX is the most accurate test, and we're going to show you some studies. Off-brand tests cost cats their life. And we're going to talk more about this on the next couple of screens. And Natascha, who runs most of our tests in-house, is very, very passionate about this because we see what the stakes are when we we use tests that aren't necessarily the most accurate, and cats lose their lives over things like this. So we're very, very passionate that we use the best tests we possibly can if we're going to test cats. There is a study we're going to cite on the next screen, and this is a quote from it that I think is very, very powerful. In a situation like feline leukemia, where the prevalence in the tested population is 3%, a test with low specificity can produce positive results that will more likely be wrong than right. That's frightening to me, that one of our tests that we pay a lot of money for is more often wrong than right. So even if you're going to test the cats and you're going to use a good IDEX SNAP test, you've got to use the test correctly. And I work with shelters all across the country, and it's very, very rare when any of us use that test absolutely correctly as the instructions are written. So we're timing how long the test is cooking. The tests have been brought to room temperature, taken out of the refrigerator, whether you're using the little pipette the way we're supposed to, all of things matter. If we're not doing that test correctly, not only are we wasting money, but that test is potentially invalid and potentially the cat's life is at stake. The IDEX combo test, our shelter cost is about $13 for the combo. You can get just a feline leukemia test, so removing the FIV component, it's about $3 cheaper. So for those of you who only want to test for feline leukemia and you only want to use IDEX, you can order just the $10 feline leukemia only SNAP test. And that's what we do at Awesome Pets Alive now. So using your in-house test, something you may not know, you can use whole blood, serum, or plasma in your ELISA test. Whole blood is the most sensitive. We're going to talk about how we found that out through our studies, but whole blood is the most sensitive. But serum appears to be the best indicator of progressive infection for shelter purposes. Plasma is more expensive to extract. You can't do it in-house, and it has not proven more effective for us, so we're not going to talk much about plasma. We're going to stick to you talking a lot about whole blood and serum. So here's that test that I mentioned earlier about our different brands of rapid fire tests. This is a test that was spearheaded by Dr. Julie Levy, and if you are a fan of feline leukemia cats, you surely know that name. So this is looking at several different brands of feline leukemia point of care tests and how sensitive and how specific they were. So how sensitive are you picking up the virus when you should be, and how specific you're looking for the right thing in the test. So you see IDEX is up at the top, 100% sensitivity, 100% specificity. And you get down to witness, and you've got 89% sensitivity, and antigen, 91, vet scan, that's your Abaxis at 85. So there's a big, big difference in these tests, right? And here's what that looks like in real life. So up at the top, on the top left, you have got the witness test. And it is only 95.5% specific in the LEVI study. Thus, a positive witness test was more likely wrong than right. On the bottom right, you've got the vet scan rapid test. That's your Abaxis. It was only 85.7% specific in the LEVI study. Thus, a positive vet scan rapid test was more likely wrong than right. So if you look at these graphics and you see the cats all lined up, those are all the cats you've tested, and the red cats were false positive. So when you think about high-stakes testing, look at these images and imagine that those cats in red were potentially euthanized for a virus that they never even had. And bear with me for a second, we're having slight technical difficulties here. There we go, hopefully we're back. So now that we know that we can test with serum, and hopefully I've convinced you all to switch to an IDEX brand test if you're not doing it already, let's talk a little bit about how you can test with serum. So here's how you're going to do it. You're going to draw 1 ml of blood from the cat. You're going to insert that blood into a red top serum tube like you see on the right or on the left. Let that serum tube sit out for about 45 minutes so it begins to clot. If you spin it down any sooner, it's going to get a little hemolyzed, so just let that tube sit there and chill for 45 minutes or so. And then spin that sucker down in a centrifuge for 15, 20 minutes. If you don't have a centrifuge, you can pick one up on eBay for 15, 20 bucks, or you can just let this tube sit upright for an hour or so and it'll separate all on its own. So just because you don't have a centrifuge or a lab in-house, you can still do this test. Once your serum tube is all separated, like you see on the left, what you're going to do is take 3 drops of the clear blood serum, which is the very top layer on your image. It's nice and clear. Sometimes it'll be yellow if you have an icteric cat. But you're going to use 3 drops of that clear serum, and you're going to use 4 drops of conjugate, just like you would with whole blood, and throw it all in the well of your rapid fire test. Same way, exact way that the test operates. You're just using serum instead of blood. So on the tube there, you've got your serum, you've got your white blood cells, you've got your tube gel, and your red blood cells at the very bottom. So serum is not more accurate than whole blood. At Austin Pet Alive, we have been testing on serum for many, many years now. And what we used to think and what we used to tell people is that serum was more accurate. We know now, thanks to the studies that we've run, it's not true. Serum is not more accurate than whole blood. Technically, whole blood is the most accurate. It's the most sensitive. However, we don't always care in the shelter industry for what the most sensitive thing technically is. We need something that's the most practical. What we know is that serum is the most practical because it's going to eliminate cats who are very likely regressively infected or simply exposed, not truly infected, progressively infected cats. We're going to talk about what those terms mean. But for shelter purposes, we really, some of us, I particularly, don't need to know if a cat is just exposed or regressively infected because it means that they aren't really contagious and or they're not going to spread that virus or likely never going to succumb to it. So for all real intents and purposes, they're not really a true feline leukemia cat. So I don't really need to know about them. I mostly care as a shelter director of who's contagious, who's going to have long-term effects from this disease, who do we need to keep an eye on. That's why I am still a fan of using serum for confirmation testing, if you will. So the other type of test we have, IFA testing. So this is what a lot of you guys are using for your confirmation, the next biggest chunk of everybody who we polled. So IFA testing means immunofluorescence assay. It detects virus particles within the white blood cells. And this is what it looks like when we run an IFA test on the left. White blood cells are produced in the bone marrow. So when you have sent out an IFA test, you've probably said, we're looking to see if the virus has invaded the bone marrow. That's technically incorrect, but it's a very minor detail because white blood cells live in the bone marrow and they're produced there. So you send this IFA test out. You can't run this in-house. And where you send this test out to matters. The only vet lab that we will use for IFA testing is the National Veterinary Lab, NVL. Dr. Hardy at the National Vet Lab invented this test, and he is still running every test that comes in every day. It is by far the best lab to use. It is the only lab that we will use. It is no more expensive than sending it out to Antec or IDEX or anyone else. So you too can pick up National Vet Lab and start using them if you want the most accurate IFA testing that exists. These are tests that you send out on blood slides. The cost is going to be anywhere from $20 to $150. It'll get down to 20-ish if you can make your own slides in-house, which we can teach you how to do. If a cat is IFA positive, they are likely but not guaranteed to be persistently infected. We're going to talk about that in a bit. There's a measurement to IFA as well. It's not just positive or negative. It's a sliding scale. So we're going to also record that, and hopefully you get that result every time you send out an IFA test. If you send out to National Vet Lab, you will get the measurement back. It's not just positive or negative. And then lastly, we're going to talk about PCR, polymerase chain reaction. The fewest of us listening tonight are using PCR, and that doesn't surprise me because this is the most expensive test. What PCR does is look for FeLV DNA and magnify it, any fragment it finds, until it's a detectable level. So this test too is a measurement, not just a positive or negative. The amount indicates whether the cat has a persistent infection, a latent regressive infection, or there's no FeLV DNA in the cat whatsoever. This is a wildly expensive test. We do not recommend we use it anywhere in routine shelter medicine. The measurement for PCR is what we call a crossing point. A crossing point over 30 is indicative of a regressive infection. That basically means we've had to magnify it more and more and more and more and more. It's harder to find, more indicative of a regressive infection. Some of you may have heard that PCR is the most sensitive, so therefore it's the best and it's the gold standard. In reality, PCR is way too sensitive for our use, and it's too expensive to be practical for us in shelter medicine. PCR is so sensitive that it is going to detect regressive or latent status of the virus. And latent or regressive status means that a cat carries leukemia in her DNA or RNA, but the cat is going to test negative on all other tests, including IFA. So the virus is just sitting around in her DNA or RNA, but the cat is negative on everything else. That cat will be negative for all intents and purposes. She is not contagious unless she's a blood donor. She will almost nearly never become ill from the virus or become positive. And the real kicker, about 10% of all the cats in the world in your shelter right now will test PCR positive for feline leukemia if you just go randomly test them. So let that sink in for a minute. If you went out and if you think PCR is the gold standard, you went and tested every cat in your shelter, you can expect 10% of them to come back positive, and that may freak you out, right? And remember back when we talked about retroviruses, it's because the PCR is picking up that ancestral germline that lives in the cat's DNA or RNA. So this test is good for selecting blood donors. If you're gonna collect blood for emergency donors, it is certainly best practice to PCR test and make sure that there is no leukemia in that DNA or RNA. If you are a shelter like Awesome Pets Alive, we are working on emergency situations, so we don't have the liberty of sending out a PCR test to see who might be completely negative for feline leukemia. When we do a blood transfusion at ACA, it's a true emergency. So in practical application, that means try and select a blood donor who is the least likely to have that leukemia in her DNA or RNA. That's typically going to be a spayed female who has a history of being owned and indoor, right? Don't go get the giant tomcat who's got beat up crinkle ears and has been hanging out on the street his whole life and making babies everywhere. So here's our testing schedule at Awesome Pets Alive, and I'm going to run you through it. And if you can't see this well, don't worry, don't try and write it all down. We have this available for you to download online. But here's how it goes. Every cat at APA is tested for feline leukemia on intake. We use an IDEX SNAP. So at the very top, you'll see cat arrives, they get an intake exam. We immediately test them with an IDEX SNAP and whole blood. If that cat is negative, we're done. Cat goes off to regular cat adoption land. If that cat tests positive on whole blood, we are immediately going to test her again on serum using the same type of IDEX SNAP test. If she tests negative on serum, we're done. Cat goes to adoption land, we consider her negative, off she goes. If that cat tests positive on serum, she's going to enter our feline leukemia program at that time. However, we know that she could just be showing P27 antigen from exposure, so it's important that we're going to retest her 4 weeks later. We know that the period between exposure and their ability to either fight it off or test positive is 28 days. So you're going to want to retest 4 weeks later to rule out exposure versus progressive infection. So cat has gone to FeLV. 4 weeks later, we're going to test her again with serum on an IDEX SNAP test. If she's positive, we consider her progressively infected. She's a true leukemia cat. She's going to stay in the leukemia program and get adopted out. However, we're going to run an annual serum test on her again if a doctor would like to know. And sometimes a doctor wants to know and sometimes a doctor does not want to know. We just like to know because we like to hoard data and learn everything we can. If that cat tests negative, all of a sudden 4 weeks later, we're going to kind of keep her separate and we're going to test her again 4 weeks later. If the cat has tested positive on serum, we want to see 2 negative tests in a row before we're really convinced that she's feline leukemia negative. So if we get 2 feline leukemia negative tests in a row on serum, we're going to consider her negative. She's either beaten the virus or tamped it down, or she's just latent. She's not contagious, so she can go to regular feline leukemia land. Or worst case scenario, which I'm sure you're all dying to hear about, we are going to, the cat may test any variety of positive and negative back and forth. Today she's negative, today she's positive, and it's going to go back and forth, and we call that now a discordant cat. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Natascha. She's going to take over and start talking to you about some of our feline leukemia studies, and hopefully we can start answering some of the questions that I know you guys are furiously typing.
Thank you, Monica. So we've done a number of feline leukemia studies at APA. The main folks that we have partnered with are Maddie's Fund, University of Florida, University of Glasgow, IDEX, Wynn Feline Foundation, and I also want to give a little shout out to the adopters of some of our study cats, who I know we have a number of people listening in right now who have adopted cats who have been in our studies. And we go over the main 4 studies we have done here. So prior to these studies, what we thought were the main options for a cat who was tested positive on any variety of test is that they would follow one of these 3 main train tracks. We thought that they would just be exposed and that they'll eventually retest negative and stay negative. Or we thought that they would be persistently infected, and those are the cats that you would expect to be symptomatic, have shorter lifespans, etc. Or that they had a latent or aggressive infection and they'll mysteriously retest negative one day in an indeterminate future. So a brief summary of the studies we've done here. The first study we did starting in about 2016 was what test is the most accurate and what testing recommendations can we make for shelters, specifically for shelters. Study number 2 was what does adopter satisfaction and post-adoption life look like for these cats and their families. Study number 3 is what are the outcomes for cats diagnosed at APA. So those are the 1,000 cats that I pulled and what happens to them when they're in the program. And study number 4 is a continuation of study number 1. Study number 1 caused more questions than answers. And so we wanted to follow those cats for the rest of their lives, keep retesting, and kind of see what happens from there. So in study number 1, the questions were, what is the best sample and the best test? How many cats that test positive will eventually retest negative? What is the survival curve of that 6-month period? And so we entered a cat into the study, and then we followed them for 7 rounds of testing. And we kept retesting using the main commercially available types of tests and some that are frankly not commercially available. So we're testing them using the SNAP combo, using whole blood plasma and serum, PET check for plasma and serum, PCR, and IFA through National Veterinary Lab. And then we also matched each one of those cats with the negative control cat, and we just ran them all on every single one of those tests. We also were funded and supported by the people I had said previously, Maddie's Fund, IDEX, Nat Vet Lab, and Win Feline Foundation, and they supported us throughout that whole study. And what we found was that 25% of those cats did not follow one of these train tracks. These are the cats we call discordant. Those are the cats that I'm sure most of you have seen in your care that will test back and forth between positive and negative. And what do we do with those cats? So I'm going to give you a little Q&A, and these are some poll questions right now. I'm going to give you the test results on month 0 for 7 cats that were in our study. And I want you to guess based on this set of test results if this cat is positive or negative. So this is Yanli. When she entered the study, she was a 3-month-old spayed female. Based on this first round of testing for her, would you say that this cat is positive or negative? Or you don't know? All right, so the vast majority of you said that this cat was feline leukemia negative, and based on that, you are correct. She was negative at month 0, and she was negative all the way through the end. So fun fact about Yanli is that she came from us from a shelter in Colorado who had said that her and her 5 other siblings were all positive for feline leukemia. And before they even had the time to come down here, 3 of them were euthanized for being leukemia positive and symptomatic. But all 3 of the kittens in that litter that we received were all negative at the time of arrival, and they remained negative throughout the study. So just something to keep in mind when making life or death decisions just based on that first positive test. Here's cat number 2. This is Oka Rios. And at the time, he's a 6-year-old male, neutered. At his month 0, he was positive across the board. Would you say that this cat is positive or negative? It's not a trick question. He is positive and he remains positive. I just saw him 2 days ago, still positive. He is doing great. He's never been sick really. He's had some ear mites, but he is still around 3 years down the line. And this is another little guy, Sprite, whole blood positive on intake at his time of month 0, negative on the rest of his tests. Based on the first round of testing, would you say that this little guy is positive or negative? If you're saying he is feline leukemia negative, you would be correct. So fun fact about Sprite. He was positive on his first whole blood test. And if you're a good shelter, you know, wanting to confirm and stuff like that and not just going based on the first positive test and retesting again at that month 1 and seeing he's still positive on that whole blood test and then euthanizing based on that, you would be wrong. He has been negative from his month 2 test all the way until now, 3 years later. He is still negative. He is negative across the board. So this is Jasper. He's a fun one. He was positive on whole blood, plasma, and serum, and PCR positive, and IFA indeterminate on his first round of testing. Based on these test results, would you say that this cat is positive or negative? Or you don't know? So we have over half of you that say he's positive, 30% that say you don't know, and 8% that say he's negative. See those results. So Jasper is one that I've heard Dr. Levy say that she likes to show vets to make them self-conscious. He is not a cat that follows any real pattern. But a fun fact about Jasper is that during the study, he was adopted and returned on 3 separate occasions. So whenever he was remaining in one place for any extended period of time, like in that month 4 and month 5, were when he was in a stable home environment. He was not very stressed out. He was just a totally normal cat. But later on, after he got returned, and after the first return on month 2 and month 6, he tested positive again. And we're going to talk about this a little bit more later, but it's just something we think that stress has such a big impact in terms of how feline leukemia virus interacts with the bodies of these cats. But also note too, here his PCR crossing point is over 30. So he's another cat that's more likely to be regressively affected in the long run than a true progressively positive cat. And I'm going to see him in a couple weeks and see how his test results look then. All right. So this is TRex, 1-year-old male neutered at the time of intake. On his month 0, he was positive across the board. Would you say that this cat is positive, negative, or you don't know? Feline leukemia positive, 85%. 2% say he's negative. 12% say they don't know. Monica, what are the results? Okay, TRex. So note, at his month 0, his crossing point's pretty high, and he was noted as IFA positive. So we sent all of our IFA results out to National Veterinary Lab. They give you actually a percentage of cells that are positive and not just like a straight positive or negative result. I almost didn't enter TRex into the study because he had such a low blood pressure. I was worried that something was wrong. Turns out he was one of the most interesting cats in the study. So he was positive across the board until month 4, where he was negative on everything. Month 5, positive on whole blood, PCR, and positive on IFA. Month 6, back to being only 1% positive on IFA, but positive again on plasma and serum, and also on the PET checks. So I know many of you have heard that IFA is like the end-all be-all of feline leukemia testing, but TRex is one of those cats that really proves that that's just not the case. And the interesting thing about TRex too is now that he's been in the same home, he was in the same home the entire time during the study, and he's been in the same home for the last 3 years, and he has consistently since this time been negative across the board on his follow-up retests. This is Rocky. I think that his adopters are watching right now, so a little shout out to them. On his month 0, he was positive on whole blood plasma and serum, PET check serum and PET check plasma, negative on PCR, and negative on IFA. Based on these test results, would you say that this cat is positive or negative? Are you not sure? Okay, so we have 16% that say feline leukemia positive, 53 that say he's negative, and 31% that say they don't know. Okay, we're getting more and more that say they don't know. So Rocky here has been pretty consistent throughout the study, and he's been the same amount of consistent on follow-ups as well. He's been positive on whole blood plasma and serum, but negative on PCR and also negative on IFA, except for a brief time period at timestamp 5 when he was positive on IFA. If I remember correctly, I think he had a little armpit wound at that time, so maybe he was a little bit stressed out from that. But he's been pretty healthy throughout this entire time span too. But his body seems like it's doing a pretty good job at keeping the virus at bay, and he's still around and still doing well. And now we have Butterbean. He was one of those first cats that really got us interested in what all these test results mean. He had been adopted as a tiny, tiny bottle baby about 3 or 4 years before the study started. And at his time 0, when we entered him, he was positive, but he was negative as a kitten on whole blood and serum. And then he was also serum positive and plasma positive in the PET check, but serum negative on the PET check and plasma negative on just the regular SNAP test, PCR neg, and IFA neg. Would you call this cat positive or negative? All right, so we have 56% that say he's negative, 8% that say he's positive, and 36% that say they do not know. Let's see those results. Timestamp 1, positive across the board except for PCR and IFA. Same with month 2. Month 3, he was negative on every single test. Month 4, back to being positive on everything except for PCR and IFA. Month 5, negative across the board. And month 6, back to having his timestamp 0 test results. So what do you do with a cat like Butterbean, who seems to be going back and forth from month to month to month? He was eventually adopted out into a home without any other cats, and he's doing well there. And an interesting fact about Butterbean is that every time he had chronic diarrhea, and every time he'd have a flare-up, he would start testing positive again. And we kind of think, based on this, there's some evidence that maybe these cats are quarantining the virus to a specific organ in their body, like lymphatic system or something like that, GI system, and they're only shedding that when something stresses out that particular system. And so we think that that might be the case for Butterbean here, but we wouldn't know for sure without a biopsy. So he's another one of those cats that falls into that discordant category. So the summary of what we've learned from study 1, again, whole blood is the most sensitive for detection of P27, but serum provides the most practical result for determining whether or not the cat's positive or will be symptomatic or things like that. Every single cat who has entered into the study who is serum negative is still around 3 years down the line. Whole blood and ELISA positive plus IFA and PCR negative may signal good immune response. So like I said, these cats are still around and they're all doing pretty well. And that current definitions of what it means to be progressive and regressive are just not good enough. There are thousands of different paths that this virus can take. We're only taking a blood test. So if the virus is harboring itself in different organs of the body, you might not catch it. You might have more cats who are leukemia positive and just doing a very good job of quarantining it and just not know. And it's not possible to define a cat's true FeLV status with only one test. Many of these cats, 25% of the 134 cats that we entered into the study fall into that discordant category where we just don't know. We still don't know truly what their status is. And the virus is fluid. It's not binary. There's not just one train track. There's going to be cats that test back and forth, and you're not going to ever know. So you might want to think of it more like herpes that flares up when the system's stressed instead of being something that's just one train track and only has one possible result. Study number 2 was our adopter satisfaction study. And this goes into the metrics of post-adoption satisfaction, where those cats are now, et cetera. And there's a lot of cool graphs here. And these are ones that I like to share because they're a good way to convince like your naysaying executive directors and things like that, that they should have their own FeLV program. And some of the graphs are, have you ever previously adopted a cat with feline leukemia virus? 23% said yes. We get a lot of FeLV fever, like repeat adopters and things like that. 77% said no. So those people are just coming in, falling in love with the cat, and saying that they're okay with taking them home and taking this on. And how did they feel when they learned or were told that the cat they were planning to adopt has a feline leukemia virus? 35% said they were proud that they could help a cat with a special need, and 46% were just curious. They wanted to know more. And also, in how concerned you are about living with a feline leukemia positive cat, the vast majority of them said they were only slightly, like, not really concerned or not concerned at all. So here we are talking about which of the following best describes any health problems that your cat has had since you adopted him or her. 34% said they experienced no problems at all. 43% said they had minor problems. So that would be like a URI or like ear mites or worms or something like that. Common shelter illnesses. 18% said moderate problems. So that'd be like stomatitis or something like that. And 5% said that they had serious problems. So that'd be something terminal, like lymphoma or FIP or things like that. And this is one of my favorite graphs over here about which of the following best describes how often they are or were happy with their cat. And the vast majority of adopters said they're most of the time or all of the time happy with their cat. There's only 2% of people that said they were just not really happy with their cat. And compared to what they've experienced, they expected their cat's health to be worse than it is. The vast majority of people expected the cats to be about the same or worse than it is instead of better than it is. So we're giving them realistic expectations about what to expect with their feline leukemia positive cat. We had them rate their level of attachment to their cat. 1 said they were not attached at all, which nobody said that, thankfully. And 10 said they're extremely attached. And the vast majority of people were very happy with their cats, very attached to their cats. We had 1 or 2 people said they did not have a great experience, but it's still above average, and they rated their cat a 7. Overall, how would you rate your experience living with this cat? Vast majority said positive or very positive, and 5% said negative. And overall, the impact of the adoption that their life has been on their adoption has been on their life. Vast majority again said that it's been a positive experience for them. And this is my favorite adoption metric right here, is how likely would you be to adopt a feline leukemia cat again if you're in the same situation, but knowing what you know now about feline leukemia virus. Vast majority of people said that they are likely or somewhat likely to adopt a feline leukemia positive cat again. Even if they lost them, even despite everything, they're still more likely to adopt another feline leukemia cat again. And something extra interesting is that we also sent out this survey to people who have feline leukemia negative cats at home to see how they responded to the adoption metrics. And note that people who adopted a feline leukemia cat have rated a higher level of attachment to their cat, have higher satisfaction with the adoption process, and also they report that the feline leukemia positive cats have overall been healthier than the negative cats. So let that sink in for a moment. The feline leukemia positive cats have been healthier in their homes than the negative cats, according to these adoption metrics. So study number 3 was one that we did with the University of Florida, Dr. Levy and Heather Lockhart. And it just kind of measured the metrics of what happens when a cat comes into our program. So of the 1,000 or so cats who entered into our study, 78% were positive on intake, and then 22% were negative on intake for feline leukemia virus. So every single one of those 22% of cats was going to be euthanized, more or less, for having a virus that they don't actually have. And of that 78%, the vast majority of them have been adopted. We have lost about 13% before the time of adoption. Most of the time it's going to be due to something like anemia or lymphoma or FIP, something terminal. We never euthanize a healthy cat who has feline leukemia virus. And of the 801 cats entered into the study, 149 were tested negative at intake and exited the program at that time. 528 had that final outcome, which is the 78% that were adopted or passed away. And we still had 124 left in shelter and foster. Something interesting to note too is comparing the 22% to the 78%, the health of the cats at the time of intake was not different, or not very different anyway, between the cats who were negative at the time of intake for feline leukemia virus and the cats who were positive for feline leukemia virus. There was virtually no difference in how healthy they were on intake. And one of my favorite stories to share about that is one time we took 2 cats from a sending shelter who had no feline leukemia program. One was this robust, healthy-looking tomcat, and one was this very sickly little old lady cat. And we got them both here, and one of them retested negative on intake. I told the shelter that, and they were surprised. It was the little old lady cat who was very, very sick and had chronic signs of illness throughout her entire time with us, who was actually negative for the virus, instead of the healthy, robust tomcat who was positive for it. And this little graphic over here, figure 2, is just showing you all the different states and areas where we have taken feline leukemia cats from across America, and a couple extra countries too. So in terms of conclusions, there is a high national demand for life-saving options for cats with feline leukemia, and we're hoping that as time goes on, there will be more and more options for them so that they don't all have to be shipped into us. And then FeLV infections could not be confirmed in nearly 1 in 4 cats. So pretty much 1 out of every 4 cats who came to us was negative at the time of intake. Illnesses at the time of intake were not different between the positive and the negative cats. And the vast majority of those cats who came to us were adopted. So people are actively coming in and looking for those cats, and they're not just sitting in foster homes for years and years. People are seeking them out. So what is needed to save them? Really not much. We're going to go over some of that with you now. The first thing to do is to have an adoption policy and procedure. So just putting them up for adoption to begin with. So many people tell me, oh, nobody in my area would adopt a feline leukemia positive cat. But I ask them, have you tried? Have you tried putting them up for adoption? And as soon as they do, most of the time they report back to me, the cat doesn't need to come here anymore. The cat's been adopted. Educating your adoption staff, visitors, and adopters. You don't want people giving this information out to potential adopters. And if you want group housing for them, any group space available is just for them. So a condo or foster home is also fine, but it's great to have just a little space in the shelter where people can just come in and visit them anytime they want. And also research and provide a list of FeLV-friendly vets or clinics. If you have a naysaying executive director or boss, we have plenty of studies and facts that we can share with you. This webinar here is going to be published, so you will be able to access it later, and you are welcome to share it with your executive director or boss. We're also going to give you a list of items that you can share as well with them at the end of this webinar here. And how to get them adopted. So first of all, we waive their adoption fees. We also provide free medical care for life for anything related to the virus. I have to clarify here that the only reason why we are able to do that is we have our own veterinary clinic. And the other reason why we have to do that here is because we have so many. There's going to be no other communities in the area that have, 1,000 cats coming in with feline leukemia virus in a 2-year period. And it's also perfect for those who can't make a 20-year commitment to a pet. I know that some of you watching ended up adopting a cat because you weren't sure where you're going to be in 5 years. So you thought the shorter lifespan actually fit better for what you're looking for. It's kind of the equivalent of adopting a senior cat in terms of life expectancy. If you can't afford the medical bills, no problem. You can get a FeLV. And then you can also educate yourself, people around you. You can become an expert on feline leukemia virus and become part of the, that FeLV fever group of people. And also by having an adoption center for them. So just come in and meet them. Most of the people you saw in the prior study just came in and met a cat and fell in love. Then they didn't have to seek one out. They weren't sure. So this was their first time adopting a feline leukemia cat, and having staff on board who is educated that can answer any questions that they have is important as well.
Okay, thank you, Natascha. So now that we have thoroughly confused the audience, I'm sure, with our study questions, hopefully we can give you some answers and practical knowledge on ways that you can start helping cats right now as soon as you disconnect from this webinar. So there's a really hot topic that's been going around this year, and you may have seen it up on UC Davis or circulating social media. A lot of shelters are not testing at all anymore, or you're thinking about, should we even be testing cats? At Austin Pets Alive, before we even started our feline leukemia studies, we were spending $75,000 a year in retrovirus testing at time of intake. And we don't send out for IFA or PCR. So that was just IDEX SNAP test, $75,000 a year. So if you think about what your shelter is spending right now, and if you remember that about 3% of cats throughout the USA have feline leukemia, is it worth that much money for you to catch a handful of cats a year? Or is that money perhaps better spent with other programs that might help more cats, like robust TNR or different types of medical funding or more adoption programming? Is it really the best use of our funds? And if you are going to test, we start getting into trouble going, well, I'm spending $75,000 a year, but we don't really understand what the test is telling us. Is it positive or negative? Now you guys are saying there's no real definitive answer. So do we want to continue spending so much money kind of going down this rabbit hole and not getting any really good answers about prognosis for the cat or if the cat's contagious? So this has become a really hot topic this year, and what we've kind of boiled it down to, this is our testing recommendations from American Pets Alive and Austin Pets Alive. If you were a shelter of resources and all the cats are being saved in your community like they are in Austin, go ahead and test. Test if you are going to use that as a diagnostic tool. That means that anybody who tests positive is still going to get a guaranteed live outcome. You're testing so that you can provide better care for that cat. But you need to understand that today's test result may not match tomorrow's test result. Or if you're a community or a shelter, you don't have low resources, your save rate for cats in your areas is not where you want it to be, and those funds can be better placed in different ways to save more cats, maybe think about not testing at all. If you're going to use that test as a culling tool and euthanize based on a blue dot popping up, I would encourage you to stop testing immediately. Those funds are better use applied to other manners of saving cats instead of spending thousands and thousands of dollars a year to catch a handful of cats when we know that that test result may not really tell you the true status of the cat anyway. So this is something that for you guys to think about. Now we're going to start getting into some Mythbusters, and hopefully we're going to start answering a lot of those questions that I know you guys are thinking about right now. So myth number one that I hear all the time, no one's going to adopt these cats. No one wants them. They're sick, and who would adopt such a cat? The answer is everyone will adopt these cats. Just as Natascha was telling you about when we did those post-adoption surveys, it turns out lots of people will adopt those cats. When you think about, this cat may have a shortened lifespan, she may be sick at some point in time. Who would put themselves through that kind of an experience and experience that pet loss, right? The answer is that actually everyone will. And I'm sure those of you who are listening right now completely understand that sentiment, that of course people take home special needs cats. They do it all the time. We need to let people do that. In 2018, APA adopted out 337 feline leukemia positive cats. Their length of stay with us was only 97 days, which for us is not even a long stay cat. We call it FeLV fever, repeat adopters. We have seen over and over and over again that when someone loses a feline leukemia positive cat, they say, I'm coming back to get another cat. Because when someone adopts a feline leukemia positive cat and they learn the reality that in most other cities in this country, their cat would have been euthanized for testing positive, they become fierce advocates for this program and for this virus. And they do come back and say, I'm willing to go through this heartbreak again. I'm willing to lose another cat because I support what you're doing. And these cats do not deserve to be euthanized simply because they may live a little bit shorter of a lifespan. We call that FeLV fever in Austin. It's one of our favorite things. 49% of our FeLVs were adopted from foster homes versus on-site at the shelter. So it wasn't even that the majority of people just happened to stroll into our campus and found a cat and fell in love with it. People went onto our website searching for feline leukemia positive cats to adopt. and went to someone's foster home and met that cat, and then came back to the shelter to do the paperwork, and then went back to a foster home to pick it up, they had to jump through a couple hoops to get their hands on a feline leukemia positive cat, and that was half of them. So hopefully I won't hear from anybody watching this webinar again that no one will adopt these cats. I promise you that they will. The images at the bottom of the screen are from 3 of my apprentices who have come through my Feline Life-Saving Masterclass in Austin, where we give a presentation on feline leukemia. And these 3 shelters went home and started a feline leukemia program in their hometown. And these are the photos and posts that they showed me and tagged me in on social media saying, here's our very first feline leukemia adoption. And the happy people and the happy cats that are alive. Because they learned the truth about feline leukemia, and they gave the public an opportunity to take home one of these cats instead of euthanizing based on a blue dot. So the second myth, these cats are suffering. Hopefully I don't need to debunk this for anyone listening, because I assume that everyone listening has pretty much had a feline leukemia cat in your life, and you're probably a very fierce advocate. But one of the things that we hear oftentimes, unfortunately, from private practice veterinarians, these cats are sick and suffering. We need to humanely euthanize them to prevent the suffering. One of our favorite things to do at Austin Pets Alive, where we've got our Feline Leukemia Adoption Center, is invite people in and ask them to point out the cat which is sick and suffering and needs to be euthanized. And of course, we're joking because you can't pick out a feline leukemia cat by just looking at it. They're just as healthy, just as happy, to have just as high a quality of life. They look like any other cat. They're not sick and suffering. Here's another fun one, and we should have put up a poll because you've probably heard this, right? How long do feline leukemia positive cats live? And most of you listening would probably say, well, I heard a couple years after infection. That's how long they live. What do you guys think about that? I can tell you that it's wrong. What I can also tell you is that we don't know. So here's a really sobering fact. It's 2019. We do not know how long naturally infected feline leukemia positive cats live. There has never been a study which follows naturally infected cats throughout their lives until their natural death. And we don't know how long they live because historically we have always euthanized these cats. So that's a really sobering statistic, right? We don't know how long the cats live because we just euthanize them. Thank God times are changing, right? What we do have is another wonderful study from Dr. Julie Levy, and she looked at a 6-year survival study of over 67,000 cats. So this is a great big study, right? And what she found in this study was that at the 6-year mark, over 51% of feline leukemia positive cats were still alive. And this study is even a little bit skewed because this graph does not take into account the fact that many cats were euthanized as soon as they presented and tested positive, regardless of their status of health. So it's quite possible that even more of those cats would have been alive past the 6-year mark had they not been euthanized based on a test result. So that kind of blows that myth out of the water, right, that they live between 2 and 3 years after diagnosis. Here's a study with over 67,000 cats that says, sorry guys, that's wrong. So here's the other fun one, and I think that this is a big one that gets a lot of cats euthanized in the shelter industry because we are so afraid that feline leukemia is just so contagious. We can't have them in our shelter. We can't have them in the veterinary clinic. We can't board this cat because, oh my gosh, everybody's going to get feline leukemia. Wrong, wrong, wrong. It is actually really hard to transmit feline leukemia in sterilized adult cats. Really hard. It takes prolonged, repeated, intimate exposure between sterilized adult cats to transmit that feline leukemia. And even then, if you have prolonged and repeated intimate exposure, it's still hard. So there's no reason that you cannot house these cats together. In practical purposes, there are very few common sense precautions that you need to take at your shelter. But I want to be really, really clear about contagiousness because it's so important. Cats housed next to one another in cages at your shelter. They are not going to give feline leukemia to one another. Not even if they blow a snot loogie right onto the other cat's face. They're not going to give feline leukemia to one another. A food dish or a litter box used by a feline leukemia positive cat, just wash it and it's fine. It does not need to be quarantined to only your feline leukemia cats. Remember, this is a very weak sissy of a virus. You're not going to spread the virus by your clothes and your hands because it's not spread by fomites, right? So even if you don't wash your hands, you're not going to pass feline leukemia. Even if you don't, you're not going to take it on your shoes or your pants if your friends come over. If the cats rode in the same car, they were in the same carrier, they rubbed up against each other for a little bit, no transmission is happening between sterilized adult cats. And this is a little statistic from the University of Glasgow in Scotland, who were the ones who actually discovered feline leukemia. 85% of adult cats have more natural immunity to the virus than the vaccine provides. So think about that for a second and let it sink in that it is very, very hard to transmit this virus between sterilized adults. Kittens, of course, they're a whole nother mess, right? They don't have very developed immune systems. But when we're talking about adults, it's very hard. So, but your vet says, I completely get this, right? My vet says no. My vet is afraid. My vet doesn't want to risk the herd health. I completely get it. But here's the reality. Research on feline leukemia is absolutely exploding right now, and you've got to keep up with it. Hundreds and hundreds of these studies are now available, and thankfully we're running a lot of them through Austin. More and more shelters are saving these cats. If you aren't going to save these cats, you're going to be the antiquated shelter that's going to be left behind. Think about where we were with FIV in this country 10 years ago. If you're a shelter right now who's not saving FIV cats, you're really, really behind the times. And a lot of shelters are probably snickering at you behind your back, right? If you don't get there with feline leukemia, and if you don't get there quick, you're going to be left behind. Sometimes you're going to have to find a different vet. We recommend feline vets, cat-friendly, cat-only practices, cat hospitals, because the vets there, it's their bread and butter to be up to speed and current on feline research. So they're typically a little more knowledgeable about feline leukemia. And one thing that we'll do in Austin is we will go out and find feline leukemia-friendly vets and recommend them to our doctors. All of our doctors go home with a handout that says, here are FeLV-friendly vets in your area who we're very comfortable sending you to, somebody who's very knowledgeable about the virus. So Natascha's going to pick back up now, but I wanted to give everybody a little bit of a trigger warning. We're going to talk about some specific cats next, and some of them are sick or injured. So there'll be a couple graphic photos, but I just wanted to point out that all the cats that we're going to show, I promise you they're fine and well and completely healed. So don't worry, but if you are sensitive to some graphic photos, you may want to leave the room for the next about 5 minutes or so.
All right, thank you, Monica. So the myth that they are sick and will never overcome things like this. This is Scarface. He had a degloved face. He is both positive for feline leukemia virus and FIV. So this top photo here, the top two photos are when a couple days after he started treatment. The bottom left one is when he first came in, just an open raw wound there. So after a few days of healing, you can already see that the skin is starting to heal around his face there. This bottom right photo is what he looked like a month later. His face had almost entirely healed. Scarface ended up healing entirely. Even the little scarring around his eye is almost completely gone. He has since been adopted. He actually just got adopted a week or two ago, and he is 100% fine with no long-lasting impact, and he has never been sick since then. This is Tony. A little shout out to his adopters who I know are watching now. So Tony is a really great case for why you take the whole cat into consideration and not just judge them based on their feline leukemia status. Here at APA, thanks to our amazing clinic, we give every cat the chance that they deserve. So Tony here came in with a packed cell volume of 11% and a TP greater than 13. So the vast majority of people would say, oh, that cat is definitely terminally ill, let's euthanize right now. But we're taking the whole cat into consideration. And Tony was otherwise doing well. He was eating, he was more or less alert. He wasn't acting like a cat who had a PCV of 11%. So what we did is we sent him to foster to see if he was a cat that was going to be able to bounce back from this. And he did. And 2 years later, he is totally fine. I just saw him like 2 days ago, and he is out there being, you know, he's kind of a rough player and just living life to the fullest with all of his brothers and sisters. And this is Cupido. He came to us from Mexico. He had been shot through with an arrow. He had a diaphragmatic hernia. They repaired it when they removed the arrow from his abdomen. He came to us and he had a pretty bad URI, and he was acting really, really sick. But we sent him to a foster home, and she got him through that. She was able to nurse him back to health and get his pneumonia treated. And he is doing just fine in his adopted home too. So we're going to give you a couple helpful tips and tidbits that we've learned over the years. So one of my biggest hills I will die on is that I always try to delay spay and neuter on FeLV positive kittens until 6 months of age. And that's when they have a more developed immune system. And since we've implemented more strict spay and neuter policies, we don't spay and neuter FeLV cats while they're on site. We wait until they're in foster homes. Tracking that data, we've seen a decreased rate of about 5 times less FIP post spay and neuter for those cats. So we want them in at least stressful of an environment as possible with the most developed immune system as possible to give them the best chance of recovering well from that spay and neuter. Kittens do pass away quicker than adults, so that is something that you need to prepare your fosters and adopters for. We have seen research and anecdotal evidence that neonates, the teeny tiny, less than 8-week-old ones, do better. And it's about 75% of cats in general will clear or become discordant for the virus. But in the teeny tiny, less than 8-week-olds, that's 50% of them will. And then holistic support, meaning whole body. The things that we recommend for the most part is immune system boosters. So that's gonna be like your probiotics, your high quality food, low stress environment, etc. So being in a home versus in a shelter setting is a direct correlation with lifespan. That's the biggest impact in terms of longevity for these cats, is being in a low stress environment. And just GI health boosts immune health in general. So people keep coming to us with different things that they're adding to their cat's food, like lycete, or just, we don't believe in any of that except for just low stress, high quality food and probiotics. And you want to treat any signs of illness aggressively from the onset. So it's gonna be like your URIs, pneumonia, things like that. You're gonna skip, for example, your doxy and go straight to the stronger antibiotic for these guys. Or for a negative cat, you might wait and see what's happening for a few days. But for these guys, you just want to treat them right away. But at the end of their lives, you're going to save the heroics. You're not going to be performing like large surgeries on a cat who's had metastasized cancer and feline leukemia, stuff like that. But you will treat them like you would any other cat. So you're not treating those terminal illnesses because they're terminal for any cat, but you are treating for ones that any other cat could overcome. And then healthy FeLV cats can overcome anything, as you saw in the previous slides. I know a few of you had questions in the Q&A section about the feline leukemia vaccine. It does no good once the cat has feline leukemia virus. It's not going to help them fight it off. It works, but we don't recommend it unless the cat is at high risk, like the cat is outdoors and fighting. Can negative cats live with positive cats? If the negative cats are vaccinated, probably, but I want to see data on that before I can actively advocate for that as a shelter policy. It's just too much of a liability issue at this point in time. But there are plenty of people out there who are doing that, and I recommend you do your own research. And there's also no answer yet for how long an feline leukemia positive cat will live. Some pass away very quickly, and others are still going on after a decade or more. And the most common conditions that cause death in feline leukemia cats, we see anemia, FIP, and lymphoma, with FIP being the most common, lymphomas being a second one. And we see just a few that are anemic.
Okay, thank you, Natascha. So hopefully we've answered a lot of your questions tonight, and we've got some time left for questions, so get them in right now if you are still thinking of questions, and Natascha and I will do our best to get through as many as possible. But the good news is, if you're going to go home and launch a feline leukemia program, or you want our testing schedule or any of the things we talked about tonight, you can head online to AmericanPetsAlive.org, and for free, you can download all of our feline leukemia protocols, policies, SOPs, testing schedules, and all these fun things that you see listed here. So just head on over to American Pets Alive and check out where you can get some of these protocols. While you're there, if you are interested in applying for an apprenticeship at Austin Pets Alive, you can do that there. Specifically, if you're interested more in feline leukemia, you can check out my Feline Life-Saving Masterclass, where we spend a week talking about all things cats and how to save all the cats. And you can come on down to Austin and spend some time with me, and you can spend some time with Natascha and see our wonderful FeLVs in person. So it's AmericanPetsAlive.org.
Thank you so much. This information has just been incredible tonight. Thank you, Monica. Thank you, Natascha. And thanks everybody for tuning in. I also want to remind you all about the American Pets Live conference in Austin coming up February 28th to March 1st. Our early bird prices are still available. It's $175 per person for a 3-day conference packed full of information and access to rock star lifesavers like Monica and Natascha. So please join us in Austin. I think we have a few minutes for questions. So I'm just pulling up some questions here now. So adopters want the cats to be tested so their current cats aren't potentially put at risk. What is a suggestion for that situation?
I'm happy to tackle that one. And Natascha, if I know you, you'll jump in and add to the conversation as we go. So it is not uncommon for shelters to not offer testing at all. There's lots and lots and lots of shelters who don't do any testing. This year in Austin, we actually discontinued testing for FIV. And so I'll use us as an example here. What we have done is tell adopters, we don't test for FIV anymore. If you would like to test for FIV, have at with your private veterinarian. And we have them initial a little thing on their contract that says, I'm aware that my cat has not been tested, and if I want to know, I'll take the cat to my vet and do it at my cost. So that is certainly an option that you can pursue. The thing that, why I enjoy doing that is, hopefully through these slides, you've kind of seen this is not really a shelter issue, right? Our job at the shelter is to take cat in and find it a new home. Our job is not to be its steward for the rest of its life and take care of it for the rest of its life. And with feline leukemia particularly, as you've seen, this is a fluid virus. It's ever changing through the rest of the cat's life. And our position is that's really something that you should take up as an adopter with your normal veterinarian. That's a lifelong treatment decision that you're going to have to make with your private veterinarian. So as a shelter staff, I want to push that responsibility onto private practice and help educate private practice to say, this is really your territory more than it is shelter. So go ahead and pass that burden on to adopters and say, hey, if you want to have your cat tested, I think that's great. That's super responsible. By all means, go ahead and do that at private practice. Now, that said, we have also reached out to all of our private practice veterinarians in Austin, and we have said, we're not going to be testing for FIV anymore. And here's why. Please know that we will always take any of our cats back at any time. So if your adopter, God forbid, shows up at private practice and tests positive and they freak out, they won't euthanize the cat. Just say, bring it back to us, no questions asked. We'll get you a different cat or we'll help you through this.
That's so helpful. Thank you so much. So what's the average length of stay for FeLV positive cats at Austin Pets Alive? Is it longer than other cats?
I can tackle that one, Monica. So for our positive cats, on site, the average length of stay is 45 days, about the same as any other adult cat with a mild special need. For the overall, including cats in foster, it's about 90 days, just because they have to go through the whole foster adoption process, which takes longer, and they have to actively seek out those cats. But our on-site cats really don't stay with us very long.
Excellent, thank you. I think we have time for a couple more questions. Do you have an average cost of providing lifetime care after adoption?
Yes. So we just kind of went through a study with Maddie's fund on this, and it's not as definitive of an answer as I would like, but it'll give you a good idea. It'll give you at least a ballpark of where to start. The first thing that I usually hear from executive directors or from development directors when I tell them that we offer free lifetime care to cats with with feline leukemia viruses, their heads spin and they're like, oh gosh, this is going to cost millions of dollars. We can't afford this. What we have seen in our studies, either from a few years ago or what we just wrapped up right now, it's between $50 and $250 per cat to provide lifetime treatment of anything related to the virus. So even if you go on the high end of that and say $250 per cat, that's not a whole lot of money.
Especially over the lifespan.
Over the lifespan of the cat, and that includes end-of-life services when it's time. That's not a whole lot of money to fundraise to save a cat's life. Think about all the people that you could hit up right now and say, we will save this cat and we will get it a forever home if you can donate $250 towards our feline leukemia program. And certainly if it's $50 per cat, like we have seen in years past, I mean, that's a no-brainer, right? What I can tell you is our feline leukemia program at Awesome Pets Alive is one of our most robust programs for volunteer and donor support. Like I said, once you get to know a feline leukemia cat and you save that cat, you become a fierce, fierce advocate for them. We have so many volunteers in this program, so many donors for this program, especially now that we've started doing studies. You know, more and more interest is getting involved. People want to save these cats. And so for us, they're one of the easiest programs that we run to fundraise for, because people want to be heroes.
Thank you so much for that. And I love all of that. I think we have time for one more question. Do you test cats in a TNR program? And if so, what is the outcome for an initial positive on a cat?
Well, I would love to tackle that one, Natascha, but feel free to jump in. So it has been best practice from everyone from Alley Cat Allies to University of Florida. Every big, you know, TNR program in the country has universally come out for a long time now and said, do not spend your money testing cats who you are TNRing, even if who you are SNRing. Don't bother. And there's a couple reasons for this, and I'll try and be quick here. In order for TNR to be effective, you really have to do high impact TNR. That means spaying and neutering thousands of cats, not hundreds, or millions of cats and not thousands. And if you are testing cats and spending $15, $25, $50 a cat to test, that's another spay and neuter that you could have done instead of testing. And then you have to take into account, okay, so maybe you do get a positive test result. What are you going to do with that cat now? For a lot of you, you may say, well, I guess we have to euthanize that cat now. So again, if you are going to use that test as a culling tool, stop testing. And the other thing to think about is, how did we learn that feline leukemia is transmitted tonight? It's mostly transmitted through mating and from queen to kitten. If you spay and neuter those cats, they're not transmitting the virus anymore, right? Because we've seen how hard it is to transmit it in sterilized adult cats. So by TNRing the cats, by sterilizing them, you have effectively cut off the transmission train tracks for these cats. And you're going to put the cat back out with potentially feline leukemia, but he's already exposed everyone in the colony. It's kind of like closing the barn doors after the cows are out. He's already exposed everybody. Somebody's exposed him. You have no idea where that cat is wandering, where he may be tomorrow. You can't control it. So no spending money on testing for TNR cats. That's something I can tell you with 100% certainty. Please just stop it.
Thank you so much. It's so interesting. I feel like we could have a webinar on that topic alone. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in, and thank you so much, Monica and Natascha, for this very informative webinar. Please come to our conference for best practices in life-saving, and you can meet these folks in person. And we hope to hear from you soon. Good night.